Atheism. What is atheism? Atheism is the absence of belief in any God, gods, or spiritual beings. It is the absence of belief in the existence of deities or the rejection of the belief that any deities exist. The word atheism comes from a, meaning without, and theism, meaning belief in God or gods. Atheists don't use God to explain the existence of the universe. Atheists say that human beings can devise suitable moral codes to live by without the aid of a God, creeds, or scriptures. People are atheists for many reasons, such as they find insufficient evidence to support any religion. They think that religion is nonsensical. They once had a religion and have lost faith in it. They live in a non-religious culture. Religion doesn't interest them. Religion doesn't seem to be relevant to their lives. Religion seems to have done a lot of harm in the world. The world is such a bad place that there can't be a God. Many atheists are also secularists who advocate for the separation of the state from religious institution and are against any special treatment given to organized religion. It is possible to be both atheist and spiritual or religious in some form. This is true of Buddhism, Confucianism, and Jainism, as well as some religions such as Judaism. Atheists are as moral or immoral as religious people. In practical terms, atheists often follow the same moral code as religious people based on conscience and moral knowledge of what is right and what is wrong, but they arrive at the decision of what is good or bad without any help from the idea of God. What does it mean to be human for an atheist? Atheists find their own answers to the question of what it means to be human from both theological and ethical viewpoints. Not all atheists are hostile to religion, but many do think that religion is bad for these reasons. Religion makes people believe in things that are untrue. Religion makes people base the way they run their lives on a falsehood. Religion prevents people from thinking in a rational and objective way. Religion forces people to rely on outside authority rather than becoming self-reliant. Religion imposes irrational rules of good and bad behavior. Religion divides people and is a cause of conflict and war. The hierarchical structure of most religions is anti-democratic and thus offends basic human rights. Religion doesn't give equal treatment to women and gay people. Therefore, it offends basic human rights. Religion obstructs scientific research. Religion wastes time and money. Most atheists, though, willingly concede that there are some good things about religion. For example, religious art and music, religious charities and good works, much religious wisdom and scripture, human fellowship and togetherness. But again, these good things can and exist without the attachment to a God, gods, or religion. There are different reasons for being an atheist. The intellectual is that most atheists would offer some of the following arguments as their reason for deciding that God doesn't exist. The non-intellectual is that many people are atheists because of the way they were brought up or educated, or because they have simply adopted the beliefs of the culture in which they grew up. So someone raised in a communist place like China, like communist China, is likely to have no belief in God because the education system and culture make being an atheist the natural thing to do. Other people are atheists because they just feel that atheism is right for them. Many people are atheists because they think there's no evidence for God's existence, or at least no reliable evidence, no verified evidence. They argue that a person should only believe in things for which they have good evidence. A philosopher might say that they start from the presumption of atheism. This is an argument about where to begin the discussion of whether or not God exists. It says that we should assume that God does not exist and put the onus on people who believe in God to prove that God does exist. The philosopher Antony Flew, who wrote an article on this, said, "If it is to be established that there is a God, then we have to have good grounds for believing that this is indeed so. Until and unless some of such grounds are produced, we have literally no reason at all for believing. And in that situation, the only reasonable posture must be that of either the negative atheist or the agnostic. So the onus of proof has to rest on the proposition. It must be up to them, first, to give whatever sense they choose to the word God, meeting any objection that so defined it would relate only to an incoherent pseudo-concept, and second, to bring forward sufficient reasons to warrant that their claim that in their present sense of the word God, there is a God." Atheists treat God as unnecessary for various reasons. Science explains everything. Atheists argue that because everything in the universe can be explained in a satisfactory way without using God as part of the explanation, then there is no point in saying that God exists. The argument is based on the philosophical idea called Occam's razor, popularized by William of Ockham in the 14th century. Entities should not be multiplied unnecessarily. This is usually simplified to say that the simplest answer is the best answer. Therefore, atheists might argue that since the entire universe and all of creation can be explained by evolution and scientific cosmology, we don't need the existence of another entity called God. Therefore, God doesn't exist. William of Ockham would not have agreed. He was a Franciscan monk who never doubted the existence of God. But in his century, he wasn't breaking the rule named after him. 14th century science knew nothing about evolution or how the universe came into being. God was the only explanation available. What William Ockham would think if he lived now is another matter to debate. Atheists say that the arguments for God aren't convincing. There are strong weaknesses of proof that God exists. There are a number of traditional arguments used to prove that God exists. However, none of them are strong enough to convince atheists. Some of these are the design argument that the universe is so beautiful, complex, and orderly, and that it must have been designed, and only God or a supernatural being could have designed it. Therefore, since the universe exists, God must exist. Atheists refute this by saying that actually the universe is not particularly beautiful and orderly. And even if it was, why should there be a designer? And modern science shows that most of the natural things we think of as designed are just the products of processes like evolution. The ontological argument. We think of God as a perfect being. If God didn't exist, he would be perfect. God is perfect. Therefore, God exists. Most atheists think this argument is so feeble they don't bother dealing with it. Professional philosophers usually reject it on the grounds that existence is not a property of beings. The first cause argument that everything has a cause. Therefore, the universe must have had a cause. That cause must have been God. Therefore, since the universe exists, God must exist in order to have caused it to exist. An atheist might respond by asking, what caused God? And if God created the universe, who created God. The argument might proceed that if God didn't need a cause, then maybe the universe didn't need a cause either. If God was already perfect before he created the universe, why then did he create it? How did it benefit him? Why would he bother? And if the universe was caused, perhaps something other than God caused it. The existence of evil seems inconsistent with the existence of a God who is wholly good, benevolent, omnipotent, and can do anything. Most religions say that God is completely good, knows everything, and is all-powerful, but the world is full of wickedness and bad things keep happening. So this can only happen if God is unwilling to prevent evil, in which case he's not good, or God doesn't know about evil, in which case he does not know everything, or God can prevent evil, in which case he's not powerful at all, or some combination of all of the above. And so there is no being that is completely good, knows everything, and is all-powerful, and so there is no God. Theologians and philosophers have provided various answers to this argument. They all agree that it gives useful insights into the nature of God, evil, and belief. For most of human history, God was the best explanation for the existence and nature of the physical universe. But during the last few centuries, scientists have developed solutions that are more logical, more consistent, and better supported by evidence. Atheists say that these explain the world so much better than the existence of God. They also argue that far from God being a good explanation for the world, it is God that now requires explaining. In olden times and still today in some traditional societies, natural phenomena that people didn't understand, such as the weather, sunrise and sunset, and so on, were seen as the work of God, gods, or spirits. The Old Testament portrays the world as something controlled by God, where we would see the weather as obeying meteorological principles. People in those days saw it as demonstrating God at work. And it was the same with all the other natural phenomena. They just showed God doing things. For the ancient Greeks, everything was full of gods. The Greek philosopher, Thales, moved things on by suggesting that the gods were actually an essential part of things, rather than external puppeteers pulling strings to make the world work. Myth and magic. But there was more to this ancient explanation than gods doing things in or to the world. People saw the whole universe in a religiously structured way. They had no other way to see it at the time. For instance, God provided the power that made the universe work, and God provided the structure within which the universe worked and human beings lived. Ideas like that survive in modern astrology. Many people believe that their lives are in some way influenced by the movements of heavenly bodies like planets or stars. And the heavenly bodies concerned have names taken from mythology and religion, and you'll find similar ideas in most popular religious thinking. Many people still believe or want to believe in the idea of God as a puppeteer. They believe that God is able to do things in the world. He can divide the waters of the Red Sea to save the Israelites from Pharaoh. He can respond to prayer by healing an illness or getting someone through an exam. Cosmology is the study of the origin and nature of the universe. Today, it's a branch of astronomy and physics, but in pre-scientific times, it was a religious subject, organizing the universe in terms of almost military ranks of beings. God was at the top, and human beings came pretty much at the bottom. In some cosmologies, there was also an inverted hierarchy of evil beings going down from humanity to the source of weakness, the devil, at the bottom. These religious cosmologies were rigid. Each being had its place worked out for it in the structure that God had provided, and that was where it stayed. Looking at the universe like this provided great support for the hierarchical power structures of earthly nations and tribes. Everyone in a nation or tribe had their place, and the power came from the top. And if God had decided to organize the universe in such a hierarchy, this provided a strong argument against anyone who wanted to suggest that society could be organized in a fair and more equal way. God had shown us the perfect way to organize things, and those who were ruling did so by a right given by God. It was also very good news for whichever religion was followed in a particular nation. Since the power all came from God, religion was bound to be given high status. The mechanical universe. The idea that God steered everything in the universe as he saw fit was demolished by the discovery that there were natural laws obeyed by objects in the universe. Galileo, for example, discovered that the universe followed laws that could be written down mathematically. This suggested that there was logic and engineering throughout creation. The universe behaved in a consistent manner and was not subject to God's pulling a string here and there or some unexplained influences from astrological bodies. This didn't give Galileo any religious problems, although it annoyed the church greatly, and they eventually made him keep quiet about some of his conclusions because he believed that God had written the scientific rules. And around this time, scientists began to come up with new ways of assessing whether certain things were true. Things were expected to happen in a repeatable, testable way that could be written down in equations. God, the engineer. Although scientific discovery began to explain more and more, it didn't cause large numbers of people to become less religious. Even many, probably most scientists still had a place for God in the universe. At the very least, he had started the whole thing going, and he had created the rules that his universe was shown to obey. This halfway house between religion and science still had problems for the faithful, since it didn't seem to leave much room for God to intervene in the universe, and certainly it didn't need God to keep things ticking over. God, the creator, but the halfway house also provided some support for the faithful. They could look at the universe and see how beautifully made it was and be reassured that God had demonstrated his existence by creating such a wonderful place. And since science, until the late 18th and 19th century, hadn't produced any good explanation of how things began, religion still had an important place in explaining how the world was and the way it was. Religion takes a back seat. God's role as an explanation for the way things are took a serious knock from the sciences of geology and evolution. Geologists discovered that the Earth was hundreds of millions of years old and not just 6,000 years old, as was generally believed at the time. They showed that the rocks that make up the Earth had been laid down in layers at different times. A deep layer, by and large, came from an earlier time than a shallower layer. In each layer were fossils that showed that different species of animals had lived in different times. Not only were many no longer in existence, but some didn't appear until relatively recent times. This was incompatible with the idea that God completely created the world in 6 days, and so scientists with a faith came up with another compromise. The 6 days of biblical creation were a poetic way of describing long periods of millions of years during which God worked on the world. The theory of evolution, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Richard Dawkins, the blind watchmaker. The theory of evolution explains the variety of life forms on Earth without any reference to God. It says that from very simple beginnings, processes of genetic variation and selection, that is, new forms of life, keep appearing, and some forms of life don't survive and become extinct. Working for hundreds of millions of years generated the range of plants and animals that exist today. These processes are not directed by any being. They are just the way the world works. God is unnecessary. The result of this for God has been explained by Stephen Jay Gould. No intervening spirit watches lovingly over the affairs of nature. Though Newton's clock-winding God might have set up the machinery at the beginning of time and then let it run, no vital forces propel evolutionary change, and whatever we think of God, his existence is not manifest in the products of nature. Here are some arguments that God, or that view God as meaningless. Relative philosophy. Some philosophers think that religious language doesn't mean anything at all, and therefore that there's no point in asking whether God exists. They would say a sentence like, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," is neither true or false. It's meaningless. In the same way that colorless green ideas sleep furiously is meaningless. Logical positivism or verificationism. Logical positivists argued that a sentence was meaningless if it wasn't either true or false. And they said that a sentence would only be true or false if it could be tested by an experiment or if it was true by definition. A more accurate version of this idea can be found here. Since you couldn't verify the existence of God by any sort of sense experience, and it wasn't true by definition, for example, in the way a triangle has three sides is true, the logical positivists argued that it was pointless asking the question since it could not be answered as true or false. These particular philosophers did not only say that religious talk was meaningless, they thought that much of the philosophical discussion, metaphysics for example, was meaningless too. This philosophical theory is no longer popular, and attention has returned to the issues of what God means and whether God exists. This is how one prominent philosopher put it. We say that a sentence is factually significant to any person if and only if he knows how to verify the proposition which it purports to express. That is, if he knows the observations would lead him. If he knows what observations would lead him under certain conditions to accept the proposition as being true or reject it as being false. A.J. Ayer. Ayer actually preferred a weaker version of the theory because since no empirical proof could be totally conclusive, almost every statement about the world would have to be regarded as meaningless. A proposition is said to be verifiable in the strong sense of the term if and only if its truth could be conclusively established in experience. But it is verifiable in the weak sense if it is possible for experience to render it probable. And this led Ayer to dispose of the God question rather brusquely. There can be no way of proving that the existence of a God is even probable, for if the existence of such a God were probable, then the proposition that he existed would be an empirical hypothesis. And in that case, it would be possible to deduce from it another empirical hypothesis, certain experiential propositions which were not deducible from those other hypotheses alone. But in fact, this is not possible, for to say that God exists is to make a metaphysical utterance which cannot be either true or false. Some reasons why God and religion are treated as psychological factors or problems. Psychologists have long been fascinated by religion as something that exists in all societies. They ask whether religion is actually a name given to various psychological drives rather than a response to the existence of God or gods. Such a belief is clearly atheistic. Religion, to a common man, is a system of doctrines and promises, which, on the one hand, explains to him the riddles of this world with enviable completeness, and on the other hand, assures him that a careful providence will watch over his life and will compensate him in a future existence for any frustration he suffers here. Freud, Civilization and its Discontents. Religion comes from emotions. Human beings believe in God because they want a father figure to protect them from this frightening world. They want someone who gives their lives meaning and purpose, something that stops death being the end. They want to believe that they are an important part of the universe and that some component of the universe God cares for and respects them. These beliefs are strongly held because they enable human beings to cope with some of their most basic fears. Atheists argue that since religion is just a psychological fantasy, human beings should abandon it so that they can grow to respond appropriately, to deal with the world as it is. Sigmund Freud tackled religion in great detail and had several ideas about it. One of his theories was that religion stems from the individual's experience of having been a helpless baby totally dependent on its parents. The infant sees its parents as all-powerful beings who show it great love and satisfy all its needs. This experience is almost identical to the way human beings portray their relationship with God. Freud also suggested that childhood experiences cause people to have very complex feelings about their parents and themselves, and religion and religious rituals provide a respectable mechanism for working these out. Freud also described religion as a mass delusion that reshaped reality to provide a certainty of happiness and a protection from suffering. Reasons why God and religion are treated as social functions or sociological issues. Some people think that religions and belief in God fulfill functions in human society rather than being the result of God actually existing. Ludwig Feuerbach. Ludwig Feuerbach was a 19th century German philosopher who proposed that religion was just a human being's consciousness of the infinite. He said that human ideas about God were no more than the projection of humanity's ideas about man onto an imaginary supernatural being. Émile Durkheim, a French sociologist, thought that religion was something produced by human society and had nothing supernatural about it. Religious force is nothing other than the collective and anonymous force of the clan. Durkheim, in the elementary forms of the religious life, he believed that religion existed, but he did not agree that the reality that lay behind it was the same reality that believers thought existed. Religion helped people form close-knit groups in which they could find a place in society. Religious rituals created mental states in those taking part, which were helpful to the group. To put it another way, religious rituals do not do anything other than strengthen the beliefs of the group taking part and reinforce the collective consciousness. Religion fulfilled the functions of giving a meaning and a purpose to life, binding people together in groups, supporting the moral code of the group, or supporting the social code of the group. Durkheim thought that this was enough to give people a feeling that there was something supernatural going on, since it is in spiritual ways that social pressure exercises itself. It could fail to give men the idea that outside themselves there exists one or several powers, both moral and at the same time efficacious, upon which they depend. The elementary forms of religion, according to Durkheim, Durkheim said that religious belief divided experiences into the profane and the sacred. The profane were the routine experiences of everyday life, while the sacred were beyond the everyday and likely to inspire reverence. Objects could become sacred not because of any inherent supernatural resonance, but because the group fixed certain collective ideals on an object. Karl Marx criticized religion. Karl Marx thought that religion was an illusion, with no real God or supernatural reality standing in the background. Religion was a force that stopped human societies from changing. Marx believed that religion was a social institution and reflected and sustained the particular society in which it flourished. He went further. Religion was a tool used by capitalists to keep the working class under control. Religion provided the working class with comfort in their miserable, oppressed circumstance, and by focusing attention on the joys to come after death, it distracted the workers from trying to make this life better. Thus, religion cheats human beings. Furthermore, it took the noblest human ideals and gave them to a non-existent God, thus cheating human beings of realizing their own greatness and potential. Marx argued that the illusory happiness provided by religion should be eliminated by putting right the economic conditions that cause people to need this illusion to make their lives bearable. Religion was like a painkiller, hence Marx's famous reference to it as the opium of the people. But what was needed was to cure the sickness, not sedate the patient. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the feelings of the heartless world, just as it is the spirit of the unspiritual conditions. It is the opium of the people. The Marxist analysis of religion was principally aimed at Christianity, as Christianity was the dominant faith in the industrial societies, which Marx was criticizing. God is not apparent. God is not apparent and not loving. This is one of the more unusual arguments used to show that God can exist. God is perfectly loving. God knows that human beings would be happier if they were aware of the existence of a loving God. So if such a God existed, he would make sure that everyone knew it. There are lots of people who aren't aware of the existence of a loving God. Therefore, such a God does not exist. Let's get into the history of atheism. The first atheist writers. Most histories of atheism choose the Greek and Roman philosophers Epicurus, Democritus, and Lucretius as the first atheist writers. While these writers certainly changed the idea of God, they didn't entirely deny that gods could exist. Epicurus put forward the theory of materialism. The only things that exist are bodies and the space between them. He taught that the soul is also made of material objects, and so when the body dies, the soul dies with it. There is no afterlife. He thought that gods might exist, but if they did not have anything to do with human beings. Religion was the human activity of trying to live in a way such noble but unknowable gods might live. The soul can survive separation from the body, since it is necessary to understand that it too is a part. By itself, the soul cannot ever either exist, even though Plato and the Stoics talk a great deal of nonsense on the subject, or experience movement, just as the body does not possess sensation when the soul is released from it. Lucretius did not deny the existence of gods either, but he felt that human ideas about God combine with the fear of death to make human beings unhappy. He followed the same materialist lines as Epicurus, and by denying that the gods had any way of influencing our world, He said that humankind had no need to fear the supernatural. Morality and secularism. Christianity is pronounced as immoral. A powerful but rather unexpected attack on Christianity came from a group of people, including the writer George Eliot, who thought that Christianity was immoral. They said that there was something totally unethical in the behavior of a God who behaved like a revengeful tyrant, according to the doctrine of original sin. God was prepared to punish people for a wrong that was not their fault, just because they were human beings. What sort of God was it? They wondered. Who then decided to let us off this unfair punishment because he had punished his son instead of us? One of the first to argue this was James Freud in 1849. I would sooner perish forever than stoop down before a being who may have power to crush me, but whom my heart forbids me to reverence. The philosopher John Stuart Mills in 1872 said, I will call no being good who is not what I mean when I apply that epithet to my fellow creatures. And if such a being can sentence me to hell for not so calling him, to hell I will go. Campaigning atheists used a less subtle attack on the Bible's morality, complaining that it contained far too much violence and improper behavior to be a suitable read for young people. Secularism. The 19th century saw a serious campaign against the churches by the secularist movement. Their particular target was the state church, the Church of England, which was highly privileged. Until 1828, no one could hold a public office without signing up to the beliefs of the church. Until 1836, only the Church of England ministers could conduct marriages. And until 1871, only members of the Church of England could teach at the universities of Oxford and Cambridge. And this was the same in many other countries around the world. Blasphemy. The law against blasphemy was strict in Victorian Britain. People were jailed for speaking against God at the time. The discovery of evolution. Science begins to undermine evolution. Charles Darwin, at the time of the publication of The Origin of Species in 1859. In the second half of the 19th century, the theory of evolution put forward by Charles Darwin and other scientific discoveries undermined the value of religion as a way of explaining the nature and existence of the world. During the 18th and 19th centuries, academic research began to undermine the literal truths of religion and throw doubt on the existence of God as a separate supernatural being. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes had noted even earlier in 1651 that Moses could not actually have written all the books of the Bible that were attributed to him. In 1779, J.G. Eichhorn suggested that the stories of the book of Genesis were not actual history, but were myths, like the stories of Greek and Roman mythology. Furthermore, he said these stories should no longer be read as if they were the actual word of God. Other theologians began to work with the ideas of Hegel to portray religion and religious stories and beliefs in general as symbolic ways of demonstrating truths about the spiritual life of humankind. Literary analysis of the text began to cast great doubt on the Bible itself as a reliable historical document. The German D.F. Strauss said in 1835 that the New Testament stories about Christ should not be interpreted as literally true, but as a dress of religious symbolism clothing the life of a Jewish teacher. In 1841, Ludwig Feuerbach argued that God was a human invention, a spiritual device to help us deal with our fears and aspirations. This was bad news because human beings projected all their good qualities onto God and saw him as compassionate, wise, loving, and so on, while they saw themselves as greatly inferior, Thus, humanity alienated itself from its true self. Anthropologists too were casting doubt on previous certainties. Research into comparative religion revealed that there was a great deal of similarity between the rituals and stories of many religions. Even tribal religions seem to have elements in common with Christianity. This posed the big problem of how Christianity or any other religion could claim that it was the only true faith, and how any religion could claim to be the unique result of God's revelation, since all religions seem to share the same and so much in common. Nietzsche, at the end of the 19th century, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche announced that God was dead and that humanity had killed him. Nietzsche said that it was no longer possible to believe in the Christian God. Modern people, he thought, did not believe in God anymore. And it was this belief that killed off God. This had serious ethical questions. Western society's entire moral code was based on Judeo-Christian ethics, and sooner or later, people would realize that if they no longer believed in God, they could not live by the moral code that was based on God. Nietzsche wasn't just proclaiming the death of God, but something even more radical. For Nietzsche, there was nothing left to believe in, certainly not God, but not even any external world that might provide a source of meaning and purpose for humanity. Nietzsche was particularly critical of Christianity. He thought that it was not only false, but depraved and corrupt, a contradiction of life. Atheist and humanist rights of life. People often mark the major life stage events in life, like being born, birthdays, getting married, and so on, with religious ceremonies like weddings or funerals. Atheist and humanist organizations offer their own rituals for these events that give them meaning and significance without any religious content. These ceremonies differ from mainstream secular ceremonies like civil weddings, in that they are highly personalized for the individuals concerned. Naming ceremonies welcome babies into the family and community and give family and friends an opportunity to make a commitment to support and protect the child while it grows up. Often the ceremony will include a place where chosen individuals declare a particular commitment to interest themselves in the child in a humanistic version of godparents. These people are called mentors, supporting adults or special friends. Weddings, a non-religious wedding marks the commitment of two people to share their lives together, just as much as does a religious wedding. A non-religious marriage is founded on the efforts and relationship of the couple. There's no place in the marriage or the wedding for supernatural power. Whether a couple chooses a religious or non-religious wedding depends on their faith or lack of it, and their cultural tradition. Humanist wedding ceremonies allow for far greater personalization than religious ceremonies, which must inevitably follow the directions of a particular church or institution. This allows the ceremony to incorporate words and rituals from a wide range of cultures. Some religious wedding services include gender-biased traditional language that may not truly reflect a couple's own idea of their relationship. Humanist wedding rituals often emphasize the equality of the partners. In most countries, humanist wedding ceremonies are not legally valid, and a civil ceremony will be required as well. In some countries, registered humanist celebrants can conduct legally binding marriages. Humanist weddings have been increasingly popular as a result. For example, the British Humanists Association trains and licenses celebrants to conduct humanist weddings, but anyone can conduct a non-binding ceremony if they wish to. The ceremony will reflect the humanist idea that the marriage depends solely on the efforts and relationship of the couple. Humanist wedding ceremonies may include music and introduction that sets out the nature, purpose, and importance of the marriage. Readings, a ritual of commitment for the bride and groom, or both genders, ritual actions like an exchange of rings and perhaps an embrace, a kiss, candle lighting, a wine cup ritual, or a hand fasting ritual, 4 more words pronouncing the couple married, and a non-religious blessing of the marriage. Funerals. Non-religious funerals are legal, and funeral directors and crematoriums and cemeteries are accustomed to arranging them. Many people are uncomfortable with religious funerals if religion had no meaning for the dead person, and when most of the dead person's closest relatives and friends are not religious. Some people find that a church funeral, no matter how well done for a non-believer, is just a formal religious ritual conducted by someone with no knowledge of the dead person, and which doesn't help them to say farewell to someone they love. Religious people will often organize a non-religious funeral if the person who has died was not a believer, out of respect for that person's views. A humanist funeral, although it does not include hymns or prayers, can be entirely acceptable to religious people mourning an atheist. Humanist ceremonies do not include anti-religious material. A humanist funeral remembers the life of the person who has died and reflects on their contribution to the world and others. It also provides an opportunity for family and friends to share their sadness and create a bond of support for those who were closest to the dead person. A humanist funeral ceremony is likely to include music, a non-religious reflection on death, readings of poetry and prose, reminiscence about the dead person, a eulogy, a talk focusing on the achievements of the dead person and the meaning of their life. Ritual actions might include candle lighting, sharing reminiscences with the people alongside you, moments of silence and reflection, and 4 more words of goodbye. It is likely that some of those attending a humanist funeral will have religious beliefs, and humanist funeral ceremonies usually contain a period of silence and meditation that can be used for private prayer. A humanist officiant is a person familiar with the procedures of cremation and burial who understands the experience of bereavement. They are trained and experienced in devising and conducting a suitable ceremony. Atheist and humanist celebrants. Humanist organizations train people to officiate at human ceremonies and compile lists of those who are qualified to do so. There are several types of atheism: humanism, postmodernism, rationalism, secularism, Unitarian Universalism. Humanism is a positive approach to life. Humanism is an approach to life based on reason and our common humanity, recognizing that moral values are properly founded on human nature and experience alone. While atheism is merely the absence of life, humanism is a positive attitude to the world, centered on experience, thought, and hopes. Humanists believe that human experience and rational thinking provide the only source of both knowledge and a moral code to live by. They reject the idea of knowledge revealed to human beings by God or in special books. Humanism is a democratic and ethical life stance, which affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives. It stands for the building of a more humane society through an ethic based on human and other natural values in the spirit of reason and free inquiry through human capabilities. It is not theistic, and it does not accept supernatural views on reality. Most humanists would agree with the ideas below. There are no supernatural beings. The material universe is the only thing that exists. Science provides the only reliable source of knowledge about this universe. We only live this life. There's no afterlife and no such thing as reincarnation. Human beings can live ethical and fulfilling lives without religious beliefs. Human beings derive their moral code from the lessons of history, personal experience, and thought. Rationalism is an approach to life based on reason and evidence. Rationalism encourages ethical and philosophical ideas that can be tested by experience, and rejects authority that cannot be proved by experience. Because rationalism encourages people to think for themselves, rationalists have many different and diverse ideas and continue in a tradition from the 19th century known as free thought. However, most rationalists would agree that there is no evidence for any arbitrary supernatural authority, for example, God or gods. The best explanation so far for why the natural world looks the way it does is the theory of evolution first put forward by Charles Darwin. All human beings should have fundamental rights. Some rationalists and humanists go further and argue that animals should have rights as they're living, sentient beings. Society is and should be an open society where each individual is able to live freely and equally practice their chosen life stance, and in which human potential is realized to benefit the individual and the community at large. Almost all rationalists are atheists or agnostics. There has been a long link between rationalism and scientific method. There is also a long tradition of philosophers who have approached philosophical and ethical questions from a rationalist perspective. Bertrand Russell's The Faith of a Rationalist is an example of a rationalist approach to religious belief. As well as approaching life through reason, rationalists enjoy the things in life where emotion and imagination are to the fore. There has been a long tradition of artists and writers who've been associated with rationalism and its sister movement, humanism, or have preempted rationalist ideas in their writings. George Eliot, E.M. Forster, and Emile Zola are all examples of such writers. Rationalism encourages people to think for themselves, to look at the evidence before them, and to come to their own conclusions. For this reason, the logo of the Rationalist Press Society is based on the rodents, the thinker. Unitarian Universalism is not an atheist movement, but a religious movement into which some atheists may comfortably fit. The movement proclaims the importance of individual freedom of belief, and it includes members from a wide spectrum of beliefs. Unitarianism and Universalism began in the 18th century as a reaction against some Christian doctrines. The movements joined together in 1961. The movement does not have an official definition of God, but allows members to develop individual concepts of God that are meaningful to them. Members are entirely free to reject the term and concept altogether. However, the movement literature says most of us do not believe in such a supernatural, supreme being who can directly intervene and alter human life or the mechanism of the natural world. Many believe in a spirit of life or a power within themselves, which some choose to call God. Most followers of established religions would regard this as an atheist position. Services in the movement's churches do not much, if any, mention God. They emphasize human ethical and social issues and do not assume a belief in God. While the movement is both religious and spiritual, it does not have any place for spiritual beings that have an existence outside this world. Spirituality is seen as a dimension of ordinary life, in the same way as human life has physical, mental, and emotional dimensions. Most Universalists believe that this is the only life we get. Unitarian Universalists believe there is wisdom in most, if not all, of the world's religions. They feel each is valuable for what it can tell us about humanity and the world and how people can find religious meaning and direction. Postmodernism does away with many of the things that religious people regard as essential. For postmodernists, every society is in a state of constant change. There are no absolute values, only relative ones, nor are there any relative or any absolute truths. This promotes the value of individual religious impulses but weakens the strength of religions which claim to deal with truths that are presented from outside and given as objective realities. In a postmodern world, there are no universal religious or ethical laws. Everything is shaped by the cultural context of a particular time and place and community. In a postmodern world, individuals work with their religious impulses by selecting the bits of various spiritualities that speak to them and create their own internal spiritual world. The theology of the pub becomes as valid as that of the priest. The inevitable conclusion is that religion is an entirely human-made phenomenon. Precedent. This is not a very new development. In Japan, many people have adopted both Shinto and Buddhist ideas in their religious life for some time. In parts of India, Buddhism coexists with local tribal religions. Hinduism, too, is able to incorporate many different ideas. In a world where there's no objectively existing God out there, where the elaborate sociological and psychological theories of religion don't seem to ring true, the idea of regarding religion as the totality of religious experiences has some appeal. Religion, in this theory, is created, altered, renewed in various formal interactions between human beings. Images and ideas of God are manufactured in human activity and used to give specialness or holiness to particular relationships or policies that are valued by a particular group. There is no right or wrong religion or sanctifying theory. There are as many as there are groups and interactions, and they merge and join, divide and separate over and over again. Some are grouped together under the brand names of major faiths, and they cohere with varying degrees of consistencies. Others, although clearly religious in their particular way, would reject any such label. Some of these interactions are labeled religious: rites of passage like weddings and funerals, regular worship, services, prayer meetings, meditations, sessions, retreats. Some of these are just rituals of everyday life. These include cooking and cleaning and working. Many established religions that had insight a long time ago, although they required the actions to be carried out with a particular attitude of mind to count as religious. Yet others are group actions designed to bring about the kingdom of God on earth. There are often initiatives for social change or charity work or fighting for individual human rights. These dramas remove religion from the exclusive narratives of scriptures or the lifestyle rules of various faith communities and bring religion into everyday life. They enable people from different faiths or none to work together in religious acts when they engage in social action. They are working to bring the kingdom of God on earth, and they don't worry about who God is or whether God is. Secularists oppose religion or religious being afforded privileges, which put another way means others are disadvantaged. They believe that the reduced numbers attending church show that people have chosen to give up faith. They say this underlines the unfairness of giving any special privileges or rights to faiths. Secularists are particularly concerned about education. They think that religious schools are divisive and damage the prospects of a harmonious and diverse society. Secularists are not against the right of individuals to have a religious faith. What they oppose is special treatment for religious beliefs and organizations. They think that the protection already given by the law, including human rights legislation, should be sufficient to protect believers from assault or discrimination. You may be surprised to know that while most secularists are atheists, some secularists are actually believers in a faith. While they believe, they don't think that belief is a reason for special treatment. Some secularists go further. They want religion to be regarded as a private matter for the home and place of worship, and that the state should not be blind to religion. The state should be blind to religion. They also seek to separate those bits of our present-day culture that originated in religion from the religions that inspired them. Secularists support the complete separation of church and state, the disestablishment of huge churches like the Church of England, the repeal of the Act of Settlement, no official representation of religions in Parliament or Congress, in politics in general. The bannings of prayers from Parliament, council chambers, Congress, Senate, the ending of religious oaths as a condition of holding public sector jobs, money given to religious organizations from public funds should be usable for missionary work, the abolition of any special privileges granted to religious organizations, the abolition of any special protection granted to faith groups, the conversion of faith schools to community schools open to all pupils regardless of their faith or lack of it. Religious education should be non-denominational and multi-faith. No religion should be taught as fact and no religion described as superior to another. Education should also cover non-religious ways of looking at the world. Some secularists would prefer RE to be replaced by citizenship lessons, including only brief coverage of the basic tenets of world religions. This would not exclude religious references in other subjects, such as history, art, and so on. The abolition of blasphemy laws. Secularists support the protection of individual believers, but not the protection of their beliefs. Secularist groups are entirely opposed to discrimination against people because of their religious beliefs. Secularists believe that the law should not restrict reasonable and vigorous criticism of religion. Secularists believe that the law should not prevent criticism that hurt religious feelings. Secularists do not believe that the law believe that the law should not permit incitement of religious hatred. They support legislation to outlaw discrimination in employment on the grounds of religion or lack of it. They oppose exemptions, which religious organizations are seeking, to enable them to still discriminate. Abolition of the special treatment given to religious broadcasting. I hope you've learned so much about atheism. Thank you.